set publicly for carrying out the sentence. During the penalty phase, the two sides gave very different portrayals of Cargill. Prosecutors argued that the act was deliberate and aimed at stopping testimony. They pointed to her actions afterward, including burning the body, as proof of a cover-up and lack of remorse. Defense attorneys stressed her mental health issues, her claim of a medical emergency, and her explanation that fear drove her decision to burn the body. Both sides brought in family testimony. Some family members described Cargill's character and history, including patterns of anger and instability, which hurt her defense. The jury considered all of it and ultimately decided that the most severe punishment was appropriate. Cherry Walker was at the heart of the case. Reports described her as someone with limited mental ability who cared for children, including Cargill's son. Her situation mattered not only personally but also legally. Someone subpoenaed to testify who depends on the support of others is especially vulnerable. Prosecutors used this to argue the unfairness of what they called a deliberate act against someone unable to defend herself fully. Walker's friends and family testified during trial. Her passing left a painful gap in the community and among those who knew her well. The next case left Texas divided. Was she a dangerous mother or the first woman nearly executed for an accident? Melissa Lucio grew up in Texas and became the mother of a very large family. By 2007, she had many children, including her youngest daughter, 2-year-old Mariah. That same year, Mariah lost her life. Melissa's own background played an important role in how her story unfolded. She faced poverty, instability, and a long history of personal struggles. Advocates later explained that these challenges affected the way she responded during police questioning. But at her trial, prosecutors did not focus on her difficult life. On February 17, 2007, Mariah was taken to a hospital in Harlingen, Texas. She was in critical condition and passed away 2 days later. Doctors found bruises on different parts of her body and also reported injuries to her head and organs. The medical examiner at the time, Dr. Norma Jean Farley, decided that these injuries did not match an accidental fall. She instead said they were signs of ongoing harm. This conclusion became the main foundation of the case against Melissa. Very soon, investigators turned their attention to Melissa Lucio. She was questioned for many hours without a lawyer present. During this long interview, she made statements that police later treated as a confession, but advocates and independent experts raised concerns about how this questioning was done. They said Melissa was exhausted, emotionally distressed, and pressured into agreeing with suggestions made by investigators. Critics believe this environment may have led to a false confession. In 2008, the case went to trial in Cameron County. Prosecutors relied on the medical examiner's report, expert testimony about the injuries, and Melissa's interrogation statements. They argued that Mariah's injuries came from repeated mistreatment, not from an accident, and that this was the reason behind her passing. Under Texas law, such cases could support the most serious charges. Melissa's defense team told a very different story. They argued that Mariah's passing was the result of a tragic accident. They said the toddler had fallen down a flight of stairs 2 days before being taken to the hospital. Family members also described this fall. Defense lawyers explained that no one had directly seen Melissa harm Mariah, and that the state was relying only on injury patterns and her pressured statements. Over the years, outside experts also suggested that some bruising could have been caused by a medical condition, not necessarily by outside force. The jury, however, accepted the prosecution's version. Melissa Lucio was convicted and given the most serious sentence available under Texas law. The case rested heavily on the medical examiner's interpretation and on what Melissa had said during her questioning. Many people later questioned whether Melissa's recorded statements matched the medical evidence. Forensic reviewers said the two did not line up. Independent doctors pointed out that Mariah's injuries could have come from a head injury after a fall, or even from a rare clotting condition that made bruises appear more easily. They also criticized the original pathologist for making firm conclusions without enough supporting evidence. In short, the words Melissa gave during her questioning did not clearly match what the medical records showed. This gap between the evidence and the statements has continued to raise questions about her case. After her conviction, Lucio's legal team kept fighting for years. They filed appeals and other requests for relief. In 2019, a group of federal appeals judges briefly agreed that her trial had major errors. But later, a larger panel of judges reversed that decision. Because of that, Lucio stayed on what is known as Texas's highest level of punishment row. In April 2022, her scheduled punishment date brought nationwide attention. She was only 2 days away when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals stopped the process. This pause came after rising public pressure, a request for clemency, and new documents filed by her defense team. Those filings argued that important evidence had been hidden during the trial. Supporters said prosecutors did not share information that could have helped her. The most serious example involved statements and video evidence from one of Mariah's siblings. That child said they had seen Mariah fall down the stairs. The claim that this testimony was never shown to the defense later became one of the main points in Lucio's legal filings. In more recent years, the case shifted again. At least one trial judge and some local prosecutors admitted that evidence had not been shared and that the original verdict needed another look. Because of that, a judge formally recommended that the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturn both the conviction and the punishment. Those recommendations do not automatically cancel the conviction, but they carry strong weight, since they come from officials within the system itself. This move from certainty to doubt, even by some of the state's own officials, explains why the case still draws national attention. Melissa Lucio remains under sentence, but she has avoided punishment because of delays and ongoing legal reviews. Her case has been featured in documentaries and national campaigns. These efforts have highlighted questions about her confession, the first medical opinion, and the hidden evidence. Several groups, legal experts, and well-known public figures have joined the debate. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has been asked to act on the recommendations and filings. These call for either overturning the conviction or granting a brand new trial. The process is slow and bound by strict rules, which makes the final result still unclear. Up next, a newborn vanished and his mother never came home. If you find stories like "'Tis Important," consider subscribing. Linda Anita Carty was born on October 5, 1958, on the island of St. Kitts. At that time, it was still a British colony. This gave her British citizenship in addition to U.S. residency. She moved to the United States in the 1980s. She studied pharmacology at the University of Houston. Over the years, she worked as a teacher and also held other jobs. By the late 1990s and into 2001, she was living in Houston, Texas. It was during this period that the events leading to her conviction took place. Official records show her date of birth and also confirm her intake into the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in 2002. The case that brought Linda Carty to trial centered on a plan involving a newborn baby. In August 2001, a young woman named Joanna Rodriguez, who was 20 years old, gave birth to a baby boy. She soon returned home to her apartment with the infant. Not long after, Rodriguez was confronted in her home. She was physically harmed and later lost her life from suffocation. Her body was discovered soon after. At first, her baby was missing, but authorities later found the infant alive. Prosecutors argued that this was not a random act. They said the confrontation happened during a planned effort to take the newborn. Evidence at trial suggested that Linda Carty organized the plan and asked others to carry it out. According to the state, this made the case especially serious under Texas law. They said that the passing occurred in connection with an unlawful taking of the baby, which placed it under the category of capital cases. The prosecution's version described a scheme where the newborn would be taken and presented as someone else's child. Investigators pointed to phone records, witness accounts, and the movements of people who were identified as Carty's partners in the plan. During the trial, witnesses testified about Carty's behavior in the days surrounding the event. They also spoke about conversations that suggested planning. The jury heard testimony that connected her to the group and to the plot. The state argued that Joanna Rodriguez lost her life during the unlawful taking of her baby. This, they said, was why Carty faced the highest level of charges and the possibility of the most severe sentence. Why would someone target a newborn? Prosecutors said the motive was to take the baby and use him in some way. They suggested it could be to raise as one's own child, to hand over to someone else, or to fulfill a personal plan. According to the state, the main point was the act itself. Taking the baby meant the mother had to be removed, and that is what led to the fatal outcome. The motive, they argued, was tied to the idea of acquiring a newborn and presenting him as one's own, even through deception. But questions still remain. How direct was Carty's role? Did she personally harm anyone, or did she bring in others to do it? And how strong was the evidence that tied her to the event? At trial, the prosecution presented witness statements and records linking her to the plan and to her co-defendants. The defense argued that she did not carry out the harm herself. They claimed she was framed by others who were involved in illegal activities and later turned against her. Her defense also pointed out that some witnesses changed their statements or gave inconsistent testimony. They argued that other parts of the evidence were weak or only circumstantial. Carty was arrested and charged with a capital case. Her trial took place in 2002. The prosecution presented witnesses who spoke about planning and coordination. Some testified that Carty made statements suggesting her involvement. The defense tried to create doubt. They argued that the evidence did not prove beyond doubt that Carty had the intent or direct role required for a capital case. Still, the jury found Carty guilty. On February 21, 2002, after the jury's decision, the court gave her the most serious sentence. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals later upheld the conviction and the sentence. Her legal team filed many appeals in both state and federal courts. They argued that her lawyers did not provide proper defense, that prosecutors made mistakes, and that some evidence was not shared with the defense. These appeals were reviewed at different stages but were rejected each time. A major question later came up. Did authorities follow international rules about consular access? This was important because Carty was a British citizen. Under international rules, U.S., authorities should have informed the British consulate quickly so that consular staff could assist her. The answer was no. The British consulate was not notified at the time of her arrest or trial. Because of this, she did not receive consular assistance that might have helped her defense early on. The United Kingdom later argued that U.S. officials failed to meet their duty. They believed this could have changed how her defense was handled. The UK even filed legal support for Carty's appeals. British officials also spoke publicly about the issue, but this argument did not lead to her conviction being overturned. After the conviction and sentence, Carty's lawyers filed multiple appeals and petitions. They claimed her trial lawyers did not properly investigate or follow leads that could have helped her case. They also argued that the prosecution failed to disclose evidence that might have supported her innocence or reduced her responsibility. Her legal team asked for a retrial or new review. Courts examined these claims but denied relief many times. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to review her case on different occasions. In 2018, the court declined to review a petition that argued her trial had many legal errors combined. Over the years, human rights groups and organizations against the most serious sentences highlighted her case. They pointed to legal problems and the issue of consular access. These efforts drew attention from the press and even gained high-profile support. Still, none of this led to her conviction being overturned. So what evidence tied Carty to the case? The prosecution relied on witness statements. These included people who said Carty spoke with those who carried out the abduction. Phone records and communications suggested coordination. Co-defendants also claimed that Carty was involved. The prosecution argued that her actions and words, both before and after the incident, showed she was part of an organized plan. The defense challenged this. They said the witness statements were inconsistent. They also pointed out that co-defendants had reasons to shift blame. They stressed that no direct forensic evidence showed Carty physically caused Joanna Rodriguez's passing. The jury and judge listened to both sides. They accepted the prosecution's version of events and gave the harshest sentence. Carty remains in custody in Texas under this sentence. Her conviction and sentence have been upheld through multiple appeals. Up next is a midnight 911 call, 2 children gone, and a mother's wounds that raised more questions than answers. On the night of June 6, 1996, Darlie Routier called 911 from her home in Rowlett, Texas. She said that someone had entered the house, hurt her, and also harmed her 2 oldest sons. Her husband and their baby were asleep upstairs at the time. When first responders arrived, both boys, Devin, who was 6, and Damon, who was 5, had been seriously injured and did not survive. Darlie herself had cuts on her arm and throat. A large kitchen tool was found inside the house. Within just a few days, investigators began to treat the situation as suspicious. On June 18th, Darlie was taken into custody. The following year, in February 1997, she was found guilty in connection to Damon's case. She received a sentence that placed her on Texas's row for the most severe punishments. She has remained there ever since. The Routier family lived in a brick home at 5801 Eagle Drive. It was an ordinary suburban house where they ate meals together, watched television, and spent time as a family. In the early morning hours of June 6th, Darlie said she had been resting on the living room floor with Devin and Damon. Her husband Darren and their infant son Drake were upstairs. At about 2:30 in the morning, she made the emergency call. She said a man in dark clothes and a baseball cap had entered the room and hurt them. Paramedics and police quickly arrived. They found Damon with severe wounds, and he was declared gone at the scene. Devin was rushed to the hospital but did not make it. Darlie had a cut across her throat and deep injuries to her arm that required stitches. The large sharp object that was recovered was inside the home. Investigators then started to focus closely on the details. They examined the red patterns, the location of the weapon, the cut screen on the garage door, a red-stained sock found near the house, and the nature of Darlie's wounds. Some experts believed the scene had been staged. The prosecution later claimed that Darlie had harmed her children herself, broken a glass to create noise, cut the screen to suggest forced entry, and placed the sock outside to make it look like an intruder had fled. They also argued she injured herself to support that story. Her defense team strongly disagreed. They said the evidence did not prove she had done it. They pointed out that some forensic details, like the DNA on the sock and an unidentified red fingerprint, were not clearly linked to her. Two things that happened soon after became central to the case. About a week later, a home video showed the family visiting the boys' graves. They used silly string during the visit, which some people thought looked like a party rather than mourning. That clip was replayed many times in the news and later shown in court. Jurors later admitted it influenced them. The second issue was that no outside suspect was identified, and there was no direct eyewitness. 12 days after the incident, Darlie was arrested. Why did prosecutors focus on her? The main reason was the scene and her actions afterward. They believed the way the wounds looked, the location of the sharp weapon, and other elements were not consistent with an outside intruder. Instead, they argued it fit a staged setup. The state also suggested that the family was facing financial struggles, and they hinted that Darlie could have been under pressure. Her defense pushed back. They noted there was no confession, no solid motive, and important pieces of evidence had not been tied to her. These opposing views shaped the trial and later appeals, which have stretched on for decades. Darlie was formally arrested on June 18, 1996. Prosecutors decided to try her first for Damon's case, leaving Devon's case pending. By trying one at a time, they believed it gave them the best chance for a severe conviction. The trial drew massive media attention. The silly string video, constant television coverage, and emotional reactions from neighbors stirred public opinion. Some people supported Darlie and questioned whether investigators made mistakes. Others believed the video and her behavior showed guilt. That clash between her supporters and critics defined the courtroom atmosphere, and it has continued to spark debate ever since. The trial began in January 1997 in Kerrville. The venue had been changed from Dallas. The prosecution's case relied heavily on physical evidence. Their main theory was that Darlie had set up the scene to look different from what actually happened. Prosecutors presented a timeline showing how they believed she could have harmed the boys, arranged the evidence, and then injured herself to support the story of an intruder. They highlighted a broken wine glass, a cut window screen in the garage, and a sock with red stains that was found in an alley. These items were presented as signs of possible staging. They also pointed to what they described as unusual behavior. This included moments from a home video. The prosecution argued this showed she was not the shocked and grieving mother she claimed to be. The defense strongly challenged this version of events. Investigators and experts working with the defense suggested the wounds on both Darlie and the children could match the actions of an unknown person entering the home. They argued that some of the things seen as staging could be explained in other ways. They also claimed the police had not properly searched for other suspects. The defense said the prosecution's case relied on speculation. Concerns were raised about how evidence from the home was handled in the first hours and days. Testimony came from medical experts, forensic experts, neighbors, family members, and officers who had processed the scene. Jurors also watched the silly string video footage multiple times. Reports said this exposure appeared to influence them. During closing arguments, prosecutors described the scene as staged and painted a picture of an unstable mother. Defense attorneys responded by saying the state had not met the burden of proof. They stressed there was no confession, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive linked to Darlie. They urged jurors to consider reasonable doubt. After deliberations, the jury found Darlie Routier guilty of capital charges in the loss of Damon. This verdict came in February 1997. A few days later, the jury gave her the capital penalty. She was then sent to the Patrick O'Daniel Unit, formerly called the Mountain View Unit, in Gatesville to wait for appeals. This conviction automatically started a long series of appeals, as happens in capital punishment cases. Her legal team pointed to issues in the trial, mistakes in the record, and problems in the investigation and forensic conclusions. Over the years, her attorneys requested DNA testing on key items. These included a fingerprint with red spots, the sock found in the alley, and her nightshirt. Courts have at times allowed new testing as technology advanced. In 2008, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals sent certain issues back for review and additional testing. In the 2010s, federal judges also permitted further testing. At different points, both prosecution and defense supported more testing. These steps led to many legal filings. The results have been mixed and not fully clear in proving the presence of another person. The case has continued in court, not because of one single new piece of evidence, but because of ongoing questions about how the items were handled and what modern testing can now reveal. One key point in both appeals and public discussion is this: forensic technology has advanced since 1996. Items that once gave little information can now be studied with methods that detect small amounts of DNA and provide better comparisons. This progress has allowed Darley's legal team to keep pressing for new testing. But even when testing was ordered, the results did not always clearly point to another person. Both sides have argued their views after every round of testing. Judges have sometimes ordered limited testing and reviews rather than a full retrial. The legal process has been slow and highly technical. After more than 20 years, the case is still tied up with petitions, filings, and requests for new reviews. Darley Routier is still held under the harshest penalty in Texas. In the next case, what began as a plan to take a vehicle ended with a capital sentence for a 19-year-old mother of 3. Erica Sheppard grew up in a poor household on the Gulf Coast, just outside Houston. Her childhood was very difficult. She experienced repeated mistreatment from people who should have cared for her. By her early teenage years, she had already gone through multiple traumatic events. She became pregnant as a teenager and had to leave school to raise her child. Psychological evaluations later confirmed what she had described herself. She had been through repeated harm, physical harm from family members, and constant exposure to unsafe adults. These experiences left her with emotional health struggles and learning difficulties. Lawyers would later argue that this made her especially easy to influence and control. As a young adult, Erica was raising 3 small children. She had little stable housing and almost no income. She tried to escape a toxic relationship and stayed for a short time in a shelter for women, but was later turned away. After that, she moved from place to place, looking for safety and steady work. By around 19 years old, she was living with her brother. At trial, she was described as homeless and struggling to survive. This was the background leading up to the events that caused her arrest. On June 30th, 1993, Erica and a male acquaintance went into the apartment of Marilyn Sage Meager. Marilyn was a 43-year-old real estate agent and a mother. According to police records and trial testimony, the reason they entered was to take her car. Once inside, the situation escalated. Court statements said that the man, identified as James Dickerson, used a sharp object on Marilyn and then struck her with a heavy item. Erica was present in the apartment during this. She later admitted to police that she took part in the theft. Marilyn's family later found her body. The two left the scene in her car, which was later discovered in another town. The prosecution presented physical evidence to support its case. It showed that James had caused the fatal injuries, and that the car had been taken and used by both Erica and James afterward. Witnesses also testified that they saw the two with the vehicle after the incident. The state argued that the theft and the loss of life were connected as part of one event. Under Texas law, if someone loses their life during an armed theft, it can be treated as a capital offense. This means the case could lead to the most severe sentence available. The state's motive was presented as simple. They said Erica and James wanted the car and any valuables. Court records revealed that the two had spoken about robbing someone the day before. One of them even brought gloves and a sharp object to the apartment. The prosecution claimed this showed planning and intent. Defense lawyers later argued that Erica was pressured and threatened by James during the incident. But the state stressed evidence that she had been part of the plan and used the car afterward. So, did Erica cause the direct harm herself? Trial records and later reporting separate their roles. Medical evidence and witness accounts pointed to James as the one who caused the fatal injuries. Erica admitted that she helped with the theft and that she followed James into the apartment. She said she did so under threat. The key legal issue was Texas's law of parties. This rule allows someone to be sentenced for capital responsibility if a life is lost during certain felonies, even if they did not deliver the fatal blow. The jury applied this law and found Erica guilty as a party to capital homicide. After the incident, police found the stolen car. They gathered evidence that linked it to the two people involved. Erica was arrested and gave a statement to investigators. Her words, along with other statements, were later used in court. Prosecutors highlighted her role in the plan to take money and property, her presence during the fatal event, her use of the car afterward, and the fact that the victim's vehicle was taken in the sequence of events that led to someone losing their life. The jury found her guilty of a capital offense. On March 3, 1995, she was sentenced to the highest punishment allowed in Texas. Her defense team gave very limited information to balance the case. Her lawyer had little experience with capital trials. He spent only a short amount of time on background evidence and did not present much about Erica's history. This included years of mistreatment, her poor mental functioning, and psychological evaluations later uncovered by new lawyers. Experts who reviewed her later found serious cognitive challenges and mental health struggles. Defense teams later argued that this information could have influenced the jury to give her a sentence of life instead. But because the jury never heard those details, they gave the harshest sentence. Why was Erica sentenced so severely even though she had a record of mistreatment and mental health issues? There were two main reasons. First, evidence showed she joined in a plan to take property. And under Texas law, anyone involved in certain felonies where a life is lost can face the harshest punishment. Second, her defense team did not show the full picture of her trauma and psychological struggles. Later reviews said her lawyer had not done enough to investigate or present this information. Some judges questioned whether the process was fair, but higher state courts and federal panels mostly upheld her sentence. After being convicted, Erica's lawyers filed many appeals in both state and federal courts. They argued that her trial lawyer had been ineffective. They also said the jury never saw important background evidence about her trauma and disabilities, and that unfair jury selection may have influenced the case. A federal district judge and a dissenting judge on the Fifth Circuit agreed her lawyer was ineffective and that the jury never heard the full story. But multiple higher courts still refused to change the sentence. The Fifth Circuit and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled against her many times. Her case drew international attention. In 2021, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights asked the United States to hold off on carrying out her sentence while they reviewed her petition. They pointed out her disability and her young age at the time of sentencing. Advocacy groups also raised concerns. They highlighted her history of childhood mistreatment, traumatic experiences, mental disabilities, and an inexperienced defense. Well-known activists and organizations publicly supported her. James Dickerson, the man who inflicted the wounds according to evidence, was also convicted and sentenced to the harshest penalty. He later passed away while in custody in 1999. This left two different outcomes. One defendant passed in prison, while Erica continued to live on row for decades, still fighting her conviction. The family of the victim wanted closure. Some relatives of Marilyn Meager said they believed Erica was, at the very least, a ringleader and should remain behind bars for life or face the sentence already given. Over time, federal judges wrote detailed opinions about what had and had not been presented in her trial. One judge said her lawyer had failed to provide effective assistance because he did not present important background details. Another judge, in a later ruling, disagreed that this failure was enough to overturn the sentence, citing limits on how federal courts review state decisions. The result has been mixed. Some judges and experts believe the trial was deeply flawed. Others in higher courts ruled that the conviction and sentence should stand. Because of this, the legal fight has focused less on whether the loss of life happened, and more on whether the process of sentencing a young woman with a history of neglect and mental health issues was fair. Erica has now spent decades on Texas's row. Reports describe her as frail and struggling with chronic pain and disability. While in prison, she turned to religion, received visits, and gained support from public figures and human rights groups. Writers and advocates use her story to raise questions about how the justice system treats women, people with mental disabilities, and survivors of long-term mistreatment. Supporters believe her background was not given proper weight at trial. Critics, including the victim's family, continue to stress the seriousness of the life lost and the pain it caused them.